What I look for on someone's resume is less about the type of company they're coming from and more about the experiences that they had. One of the biggest tip-offs for me that someone is going to be able to thrive in a more white space, ambiguous, faster-paced environment is just kind of how quickly they've moved through different roles in their organization. So I love folks who have been part of rotational programs in the past, or if I see somebody who's moved through a multitude of roles in short periods of time and has shown positive progression, that really helps me understand that that's somebody who can get in, make an impact really fast, and be ready to take on more.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Hey, welcome back to Run the Numbers. I'm CJ Gustafson, and this is like my sixth take because my kids won't go to bed tonight. This podcast is with Nicolette Turner, the CFO of Headspace, a company a lot of you have probably heard about. We talk about how they make money, how they started in the first place as a B2C model and then moved to the B2B2C motion. I hope I got that right, Nicolette. The nuances of the selling motion there, the healthcare overlap, how they forecast their business, customer acquisition costs, lifetime value, how that all plays into how they look at monetization. And one of them, my favorite things that we talked about was promoting from within versus hiring, and how you have the fun conversations with people as they rise up the ranks, and also how you frame up a conversation when you know that somebody has to get layered. That's always a tough one to have. We do touch on the idea of hiring people from big places, and we laugh about how when someone says, I work at a big place like Google, but they really give you the tools to succeed and to feel like you're running your own startup. You're like, well, you've clearly never worked at a startup before. We talk about how diverse teams unlock value, and this is an amazing conversation. So please enjoy after a couple of short words from our sponsors. Okay, serious question for all my accounting pros here today. Are you doing what you were hired to do? What I mean is, do you have time to actually be a business partner, or are you buried in tedious manual tasks just to get your journal entries prepared every month? I know how that feels. Leapfin's here to help with that. Leapfin is accounting automation software that automatically prepares and posts reliable journal entries. And that's just the beginning. High-growth businesses like Reddit, Canva, and SeatGeek choose Leapfin to eliminate manual tasks, accelerate month-end close, and enable accounting leaders like you to provide faster insights that will help your company grow. If you're battling messy transaction data from Stripe, Adyen, Shopify, Apple Pay, and other PSPs, and then battling again to get it all into NetSuite, go to leapfin.com to watch their short product intro video. And if you like what you see, request a 15-minute conversation to learn how accounting automation can help you and your team. Check out leapfin.com today. That's leap like jump, fin like shark. I just made that up. I hope they're okay with it. Leapfin.com. Ready to plan confidently, close faster, and report more accurately? Here's what sets Planful apart. Imagine purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. It's easy to implement Planful in just weeks and with minimal IT involvement, so you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business on your key financial progress. Best of all, Planful grows with you. Its unparalleled scalability ensures that no matter how fast your business expands, Planful can keep up. See why over 1,500 customers worldwide choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Oh yeah! Go to planful.com/metrics to see how you can reach peak financial performance with Planful. That's planful.com/metrics. It started out as just me and my dog, recording to nobody. But now, Nicolette, welcome to the #1 podcast for CFOs.
Love it. Thank you for having me.
Why don't we start out by going over how you ended up at Headspace in the first place?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of an interesting story. So initially when Headspace reached out to me, it was fairly early on in the pandemic, so early 2020. At the time, I was actually 7.5 months pregnant.
Wow.
Well, yes, I know, as well as, a fairly avid user of the product. And so I'll step back and kind of walk you through that first, because I think that that's kind of the interesting part of the story. So when I got pregnant, I was not obviously expecting it to happen during the pandemic. And so when, the pandemic hit, everybody went into lockdown. As you can imagine, being pregnant with your first child, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress that went into that time in my life. And so I started looking into mental health resources as a way to be able to help me with my stress and anxiety around kind of being at a very vulnerable part of my life, with also a very, very high stress job at the time with a Fortune 15 company. And so as part of that journey and looking for mental health resources to kind of help me through that, I found Headspace. It was offered through my employer. Several of my girlfriends had referred it over to me. And so I had started to use the product, and I was a pretty avid meditator at that point. And so when they reached out to me kind of cold on LinkedIn, I thought about it a little bit as kismet. But at the time, was very happy with the employer I was with. I had been with them at different times in my career, actually twice, had been there over a decade, had high levels of advocacy across the C-suite. And so I wasn't really looking to leave, but just felt like it was such a unique opportunity to learn more about a company and a product that I used. And so decided to take the interview. Fell in love with the company, fell in love with the mission and the team, as well as their vision about really, stepping deeper into healthcare from where they were currently playing, which was very focused on wellness and kind of subacute parts of mental health. And so they were looking for somebody with my background very specifically, so deep experience in healthcare, as well as somebody who understood kind of the B2B motion, as it was a part of the business that they were really looking to kind of supercharge and expand. And so just the chemistry between me and the team, as well as what they were looking for in my background, really just felt like it made a ton of sense. And so I decided to join Headspace coming off of maternity leave. And honestly, it's been an incredible 4-year journey since. I had been offered CFO roles prior to that moment. And I had chosen to stay with Headspace for multiple reasons. One was because, of course, I'm extremely passionate about the business and what we are building and the problems that we are solving, but also because I absolutely love the team here, not just the team that I'm a part of, but also just the broader team and the executive team across the organization. And because Sean, the previous CFO of Headspace, was such an incredible mentor, continues to be an incredible mentor and friend. And so, while in my mind, it wasn't a matter of if I was going to become a CFO, it was going to be when. And I had been looking for and waiting for the opportunity that got me more excited about the problem that I was going to be solving and the team that I was going to be a part of than Headspace. And I just hadn't found it yet. And so I will also say I did not think I was going to be the next CFO of Headspace, given that Sean, who was the previous CFO, had been with the company for over 10 years, was basically as close to being a founder as you can imagine there being one without him actually being a founder. I had expected him to kind of be the CFO until forever.
Forever, yeah.
And so it really felt like the fact that he, was leaving Headspace, we weren't going to be working together on a day-to-day basis any longer, as well as the fact that he was entrusting me with that role. And in the company's history, as the only other CFO up to this point, just felt like an incredible gift. And so it was a spontaneous emotional reaction.
Yeah.
And I've truly been honored to be in this seat since.
That's amazing. And if I go back to you, the on-ramp to Headspace, timing is everything when you take a position. And so I think you said you were pretty far along. Was it 7 months pregnant at the time? And it kind of reminds me, I was talking to my wife and we had our second baby under a year ago, and she was going through some career stuff at the time too. I can't imagine thinking about taking a very senior finance role at that point. I mean, did you go through that with the company when you were interviewing? How did you balance the timing aspect of that? Because you're really jumping into something when you also have something at home, and it's so commendable to all the other females who are listening to the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, honestly, I was not planning on making a move. I hadn't really taken any interviews up until the point that Headspace had reached out to me. I mean, if you can imagine, being 7.5 months pregnant, you're so close to having a child, and in my case, my first child during the pandemic. There was enough change on the horizon that completely switching companies wasn't really on my radar at the time, right? And so when I say that I truly just had an unbelievable level of chemistry with the team and was just so incredibly excited about what they were doing, I can't underscore that. But also, given it was during the pandemic and all my interviews were virtual, all they saw was my neck up.
Yeah, they couldn't tell.
They had no idea I was pregnant, right? And because I didn't know how serious I was when I engaged, I didn't feel like it was relevant to have that conversation with them. But it really got into that kind of final stage of interviews, and it kind of started to become pretty apparent that I was really excited about them and they were really excited about me. And so I remember having a fairly serious conversation with Sean, who's CFO at the time, and the hiring manager, and just saying, I just want you to know this. I am, at this point, over 8.5 months pregnant.
By the
way, I'm so excited about the opportunity in the team, but I want you to recognize that if you guys do decide to offer me, that you will have to wait 4 months for me. And I absolutely understand if that's not what, you don't have the ability to accommodate that, but I just want to let you know, I just have really enjoyed the process so far. And, I'm practical about these things. And so I understood that potentially could keep me out of the running, but I also did not love the idea of going into accepting an offer and then springing it on them and be like, oh, by the way. And, to their credit, the CHRO at the time, as well as Sean, decided not to tell the rest of the interviewing committee that I had disclosed this, and that to let them actually vote and select the candidate completely autonomously from that knowledge. They had obviously decided that they were excited about me, and they waited.
Well, huge props to you. Like, amazing job, amazing story getting there, and props to the company too for doing it that way. I think a lot of companies should try to emulate that process.
Yeah, I obviously very much appreciated it. And I also just think about it, at the time, if we hadn't been during the pandemic, if we hadn't been doing virtual interviews, I wouldn't have been able to interview because I would not have been able to get on a plane at that time, right? So truly, timing and obviously a little bit of luck, everything kind of came together perfectly, and here we are.
And you also mentioned that you were a user of the product. I'm guessing you're still a user of the product, and you know even more about it now because you're the CFO. And you have this philosophy that in general CFOs need to use their product. Can you speak to the significance of that?
Yeah. So what I would say is it's less about CFOs need to use the product or service. It's more they need to really understand the business, right? So I think one of the things that has always been really surprising to me is that, people will work for a company that sells some type of product or service in many instances, but yet they've never actually taken the time to do a product demo. They've never actually taken the time to use the service or to use the product, to actually understand the customer's point of view in terms of how the business actually grows and scales. To give you, a real life context to this, when we were looking at partners and we ultimately ended up merging with Ginger, which I'm sure we'll touch on later in the podcast, I actually had access to Ginger through my health insurance. And so I downloaded the app, right? And I utilized the product of the company that we were thinking about merging with, right? And I was an intimate part of the diligence around that product. It is so surprising to me how many CFOs and how many people within finance organizations don't take the time to understand the business, the product, the service that they are selling. And I think that is foundationally so important to being a good partner and strategic mind within an organization quantitatively.
Yeah, I'm a CFO at a vertical software and marketplace for auto parts, and I could not change brake pads for the life of me, but I do think it's very important to understand the workflows in which someone would go about ordering them.
Absolutely.
You also believe that CFO should talk to customers, and this is It may strike you as a really tactical question, but how do you go about setting up customer meetings as a CFO? Because it's something I want to do. I mean, do you tag along with marketing or product? Do you ride shotgun with them? Like, how does a CFO get in front of customers? What's the best way?
1,000%. So, I mean, what I would say is I'm somewhat blessed right now in the seat that I'm in that, we are a consumer facing business. So it's pretty easy for me to talk to customers, right? As well as, I was a customer myself. So I understood the journey pretty intimately. But even if you don't belong to a company that has a consumer component, I've worked predominantly actually in business to business models prior to coming to Headspace. And I did ride-alongs with sales folks. So, as their finance partner, I actually literally went into the field and sat in cars and drove to customers, sat in on pitches. And, we also, and I think this is probably fairly common for many businesses, we actually do bring our customers together, like large pockets of our customers together at different points in the year to do customer advisory boards. I go to every single one of those. I sit and I listen to their testimonials. And I think it's super powerful to understand the voice of your customer, regardless of who that customer is.
Yeah, I need to get out to more conferences. It's incredible that you did ride-alongs and you would go to some of these meetings. Would any of the customers ever ask you for a discount? Like, hey, well, I got you in the room. How about help me out a bit?
Most of the time, they did not disclose the fact that I was a finance person. It was, earlier in my career, I worked in both medical and pharma sales. And so I would actually go into hospitals I would go in with our sales folks and they would just think I was there as part of the selling team. So I would just really listen to the way that they interacted with our customers, how they talked about our services, and really understood also the questions that our customers were asking, or oftentimes, what were the biggest kind of roadblocks that we would get in the sale, to kind of help me think about, why some of that might be showing up in numbers in terms of why deals were pushing, or, why we were getting specific feedback on win rates. Why did we win? Why did we lose?
Yeah. Well, you may have just actually answered my next question. I was going to ask, what are the types of questions that you should ask if you're a CFO who gets to go to one of these meetings? But if I understand right, it's probably more of an act of listening, just being a fly on the wall and absorbing.
Absolutely. I think, that is the most powerful, but in the event that you actually do get to speak to customers, a lot of my questions to, especially our consumer customers, is, what do you like about the service? What do you like about the product? What resonates with you? What doesn't? If you could do one improvement in the product, what would it be? Things like that, to really understand kind of the value curve to them, because ultimately our business is one that's very focused on retention and outcomes of wellness and health. And so being able to understand directly from our customers what actually resonates with them, what works for them, is so important.
And that links to a quote that you gave me. You said that numbers are one-dimensional. Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah. So, at least from my perspective, and this maybe is just a big part of the way that I was trained in finance, is that numbers are table stake. So your team should be able to always provide high quality, timely results for the business. But that's not really what our jobs are. Our job is to help the business understand what those numbers mean and what it means to them to be able to create a better outcome for the business going forward, right? And so it's not just for, if you're a CFO, for the CEO, it's also, every level down the organization, if you are partnering with the business, whether you are in accounting or you are in finance, is to be able to help the business understand what the numbers mean to them so that they can get better at the jobs that they do. So whether that be around customer behaviors, whether that be around retention, whether that be around the cohorts and metrics, like you have to be able to understand what the numbers mean and then ultimately put it into a relevant context and story for the person that you are partnering with.
Yeah, I remember when I was coming up in the FP&A world, someone asked, are you FP&A with a lowercase a or an uppercase a? Like, is the analysis actually the core part of your job, or are you just reporting on it? Because I don't need numbers. I need the so what of what's falling out of it.
1,000%. What it means is so much more important than the actual number itself. And what I would say is it should be capital F, P, and A.
Yeah, all are capital, everybody. Yeah, all are capital. Also, I recently learned that the thing in the middle is called an ampersand. I didn't know it had an official name. So I can't believe I'm admitting that on the podcast. Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Mercury knows your financial operations are complex. Founders and finance teams have to pull together different tools, reconcile transactions from different sources, and struggle to get accurate answers. With Mercury, you can simplify your operations with banking and software that power your critical financial workflows, all within the one thing every business needs, a bank account. And with new bill pay and accounting capabilities, you can pay bills faster, stay in control of company spend, and speed up reconciliation. Apply in minutes at Mercury.com and join over 200,000, ambitious startups that trust Mercury to provide the precision, control, and focus they need to transform their financial workflows so they can perform at their best. Mercury, the art of simplified finances. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust. Members FDIC. I'm getting good at that voice. Quick math, the less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your product or service, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. That's the goal, isn't it? But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. Yesterday's price is not today's price. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With NetSuite, you reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud with no hardware required. Access from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies, wow, that's a lot of customers, have already made the move. So do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. And back by popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/metrics. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, you know your boy loves some metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. Please do it, guys. I really need this. Cash is king. As the CFO of a SaaS company, I know firsthand how important it is to maintain a healthy AR balance. If you can't effectively manage cash, you can't service debt, make payroll, or invest in growing your business. That's why I'm so excited to partner with the sponsor of today's episode, Maxio, the leading billing and financial operations platform for B2B SaaS. Maxio helps top SaaS companies like Chili Piper, Crunchbase, and Stack Overflow get cash in the door faster by automating collections and dunning. Gone are the days of manually chasing down invoices. Join the 2,500 plus subscription businesses using Maxio, formerly SaaS Optics and Chargeify, to eliminate revenue leakage and streamline order to cash. It's never been easier to get paid. Visit maxio.com/run the numbers to supercharge your financial operations in 2024. Not only does requesting a demo using the Run the Numbers link help support this podcast, ya boy, you also receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. Woo! That's maxio.com/run the numbers. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. I want to talk a bit about how Headspace makes money. And you had told me it's not really B2B, it's not really B2C, it's actually B2B2C. Did I get that right?
Actually, no.
It wouldn't be the first time on this podcast.
We are B2B, we are B2C, and we are B2B2C.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we are actually omni-channel. This is kind of the way that I refer to our business as omni-channel, meaning that, if you are direct to consumer or B2C, what that means is that you are marketing and selling directly to consumers a service or a product. Similarly with B2B, you're going directly to another business for a service or product. What B2B2C or B2C2B means is that the end consumer or individual is the beneficiary of the product or service, but another business is the ultimate payer of the majority of the service or product. And so to give you kind of some practical examples, think about Amazon, think about DoorDash or Grubhub, and think about healthcare. Whereas if you, meaning you are a consumer, have a commercial health plan through an employer or through an exchange, if you were to come to Headspace and utilize our therapy services, and you wanted to use your insurance to basically subsidize that, we are actually contracting with your insurance provider, not directly with you. You are utilizing our service through your insurance. So the insurance provider is actually paying or subsidizing your service, and you might have a small copay or not, but you're the beneficiary of the service without actually paying for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I guess now to link this back to how the organization actually monetizes, are you marketing to me, CJ, the end consumer, but then you're charging either CJ's insurance or CJ's company he works for?
It really depends on how you actually utilize our product or service. So in our consumer channel today, and I'm going to kind of asterisk that with today, we are currently only offering self-pay services. So it is a true B2C model. And I'll come back to that because we are going to be offering reimbursable therapy by the end of the year. But for right now, we are only offering direct-to-consumer services. So the consumer is self-paying for the products and services that we have available in our consumer channel. If you come to us through one of our employer relationships, you are either being subsidized directly through your employer, meaning your employer is paying for 100% of our service directly to you, or you potentially are actually accessing our services through your commercial insurance that is available to you through your employer, in which case your insurance covers the service. So we get paid directly by your insurance provider, and you may or may not have a very small, copay.
Got it.
It really just depends.
And then the underlying structure of it, is it a subscription?
So for our, and again, it is complex, and so I apologize. Yeah. What I would say is Headspace meditation content, very specifically, tends to be a subscription on the consumer side.
And I've used that and paid for that before.
Yes. As we roll out on the consumer side, again, we'll have this up and going by the end of the year, as we roll out direct to consumer therapy that is reimbursable through your insurance carrier, that is going to be a fee for service. So not a subscription model. So it's really going to be kind of a utilization based model. On the employer side, we actually offer multiple pricing models. It can be either through a subscription like ARR product, like a PEPM, so a per employee per month type fee structure, or we can offer a fee for service. So it's a utilization based. It really just depends on the organization. Some organizations just really like to understand what the cost is going to be, and they don't want that to fluctuate based upon usage. It's just easier for budgeting purposes. You can imagine who some of the folks who get involved in the deal are. In other instances, they only want to pay for what they use. So even though it's a higher price per usage, they would prefer to be able to only pay for what they utilize. So it just depends on the specific customer.
So the end consumer, or the one who's paying, sometimes it can be a bit abstracted, and I want to call it out because it's probably analogous to a lot of other business models out there, and it may not have anything to do with healthcare. How do you possibly forecast for something as complicated as this? I'm trying to pick out some tips for other people out there who may be trying to forecast a beast of a business model like this, where it may have different layers to it.
Yeah. So, what I would say is it is extremely complicated. So again, on the consumer side, when you have subscription-based modeling, that there is, what I would say best in class cohort modeling. So really being able to kind of understand what is happening at kind of the product or geo level, specifically for the different product SKUs that you make available to subscribers. And you build a model that essentially forecasts out based upon, very specific metrics and inputs in. So everything from, what is the level of performance marketing dollars that you are utilizing to attract new customers, to what is the actual retention metrics for your existing subscriber base. And then you try to forecast that out using different weights for different time periods, based on how historical your cohorted model goes out to. So that's, on a subscriber basis, that's kind of the way that we think about our business. In the B2B side of things, what I would say is that it's really 100% utilizing the number of sellers and what their quotas are.
There we go.
The pipeline is.
Yeah. That's what I was looking for, the atomic unit on that side.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot. I would say the subscriber cohorting model tends to be, once you get it set up, tends to be much much more accurate and easier as long as you truly have a good pulse on kind of what is happening in your subscriber base and you don't have big shocks. So like the pandemic was a big shock, right? But on a day-to-day basis, I would say that tends to be a little bit easier, assuming that your marketing dollars and your performance within the different channels that you market for new consumers tends to be pretty consistent. On the B2B side, it really comes down to individual salesperson performance, the pipeline, the region, as well as the customer. And so that tends to be a little bit more volatile to forecast. But I would say that over time, as you have a much longer understanding of history and win rate, you can actually get pretty accurate on that side of the fence as well.
That's amazing. Thank you for walking us through that nuanced overview there. I'd imagine then you have to track and anticipate customer acquisition costs differently for each of these channels then.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, like LTV to CAC is right. Like it is the metric, a leading metric for any business. But I would say that, customer acquisition on the consumer side tends to be, as long as you have a pretty decent like media mix model, something that you can predict fairly easily and anticipate. There's really, a few channels that we specifically use that we have a very strong understanding of what customer acquisition cost is going to be. And we actually measure that on a daily basis. So we have daily cohorts. So
wow.
It's something that we are able to kind of extract out and predict with a high level of accuracy. On the B2B side, customer acquisition, there are several things that kind of go into it, but the vast majority of what really kind of goes into is enterprise marketing, as well as the cost of the salesperson, right? When you're thinking about the acquisition of that customer. So it is very different to kind of forecast, and, the win rate. And as you bring new products to market, it can obviously add some confounding variables.
Wow. And so, just to make this even more complicated, but you're doing a great job making it simple for my simple mind here. Maybe you can speak to how your healthcare experience helped you supercharge this, because there is a healthcare element to all this in the background too.
There is. So, the healthcare part of our business is fascinating, but it is also very, very complex. And so I always try to think about the easiest way to explain concepts to folks who may or may not be deeply integrated into the space, because healthcare tends to be a little bit more complicated than most. But, what I would say is when you get payers involved, it becomes very complicated, because if you are utilizing our services via a reimbursed payer model, we have to submit an individual claim for every single person.
Oh my goodness. I've had to do that for a dentist appointment before. I still don't actually know if I got the money back.
You might want to take a look. My guess is yes, but yeah. So, when a business essentially sets up itself to be reimbursed through a payer, you don't have a block of claims. You actually have to file these on an individual claim basis. And what I would say is that payers are, they're not the most technologically advanced.
Yeah, I've heard it's just piles of paper.
It is a lot of kind of manual work, and each payer has a very specific syntax that you actually have to submit claims. And they can deny claims without telling you why. Because if you think about it, they are actually kind of churning through millions and millions of claims each year. And so, we are a very small portion of what they're actually kind of consuming into their ecosystem. And so, you can get rejected for a claim and not know why, and then have to kind of go back and try to look at their very specific syntax to see where you might have erred out, and then you have to refile. So the amount of time that it actually takes to collect from a payer is significantly longer than from an employer. So that obviously has impacts on working capital and cash flow.
Oh, wow. Okay. This is the inside baseball that people come to the podcast for. So can you maybe just speak to how you think about working capital and cash flow there? Because you have different types of customers paying you at different times. I thought it was hard trying to manage net 30 versus net 45. This is a whole different ballgame.
I'm going to blow your mind. So on the consumer side, consumer side is self-pay for the most part, right? And it's upfront payment. So, if you were to come to Headspace.com today and subscribe to our best-in-class meditation content, you'll pay your your subscription fee up front, right? And so we will actually get cash from you as a consumer right away, right? And then on the P&L, we're actually going to recognize that over the course of your subscription period. So if you think about that's a beautiful working capital,
Yeah, that's the best in the business.
right? You get upfront payment. On the B2B side, right, it can be everything from something very similar where somebody is going to pay annually upfront to it could be monthly to it could be quarterly or it could be semi-annually in arrears. So on a customer by customer basis, like we have obviously our standard set of payment terms that we try to manage to, but depending on the size of the customer, depending on the services that customer is going to consume, we're invoicing them anywhere from once a year up to 12 times a year, right? And then everything from a fixed fee for each one of the payments to a completely 100% bespoke utilization on what they've consumed in the last 30 days. So that is essentially what we do for consumers. On the payer side, right, we cannot actually bill a claim until we've actually provided the service. And then when we actually get paid by the payer can be anywhere from 30 to 90 plus days out. So to kind of draw this back to a recent, kind of big thing that hit the media and the news. I don't know if you heard about the Change Healthcare cyber attack. That basically was the largest claims clearinghouse in the entire country. And so I don't actually know any healthcare provider that wasn't in some way, shape, or form impacted by them. We ended up not being able to get paid for 90 days.
Yikes.
There were some doctors' offices who essentially had to shut down because they weren't able to receive, payment for the services that they had provided and weren't able to make payroll, right? So we were luckily not in that situation, but each one of our channels has a huge difference in DSO in terms of what it takes from service to cash.
That totally resonates. So growing up, my dad, he's a physical therapist by trade. And he was an entrepreneur where he had different offices that he opened throughout Massachusetts. And he would say to me that working with the payees would be a nightmare. Because like you said, rejecting claims because it's a comma instead of a period or something like that. But then they all have their own days payable that you have to anticipate. And different things in the system can always throw it off. And he would say to me, like, well, I still have to pay payroll every 2 weeks. They don't care about that. And so it's just a reality of like, you have this business that may be doing a lot, quote unquote, revenue, but the actual collections, because of the third parties you're dealing with, like that, you got to manage around that somehow.
It is. It's really difficult. When I look at DSOs, based on the channel, it varies hugely. And I have to be able to then, build that into my cash forecast and in my working capital forecast to be able to manage cash effectively to ensure that we always have enough capital on hand to be able to meet our needs and obligations.
I'm so glad you brought this up because most of the software CFOs that I talk to, like there's not much to unpack in terms of cash conversion cycle because there's no inventory. This is a real life use case, everybody. I'm so glad.
They're very lucky.
Yeah, I know. We're all privileged to finally get a real one. Well, I do want to transition to talk a bit about promoting from within versus hiring. And as I said at the beginning, congrats on becoming CFO. You had this journey where you came in as VP of Finance and Accounting, and then you worked your way up to SVP and then CFO, which is awesome. And so I'm curious to get your point of view. As someone who's climbed the ladder from within, how do you kind of square up promoting talent versus hiring from the outside as the org grows over time, like your org has?
Yeah, so I think it will always honestly depend both on the individual as well as the skill set that you're looking for, right? And I think that the thing that's hardest is when you have a skill set that somebody internally cannot fill, but you have a lot of talent internally. And so you have to know when to lean into, talented folks and let them kind of learn on the job, or when the skill set is so differentiated or is so uniquely important to the organization that experience is just going to be the right call in that very specific instance. And so I always kind of ask myself, if I have a really talented person within my organization who is ready for the next step and I have a role at the next step, I want to make sure that they're set up for success. So if it is, If the role is more general in nature, or there is enough infrastructure around that role that that person can have some grace to kind of get up to speed and learn on the job, then I'm always going to lean into the internal talent, right? But if it is a differentiated skill set, a skill set that's highly technical or extremely important to the organization, and we don't have the infrastructure to wrap around that person that allows them to be successful in the next role, I'm being kind to them and I'm doing what's best to the organization to hire outside for that. So for instance, I'll give you a very practical example is we are hiring for an internal tax director. We are starting to see a lot going on in the tax space, and we feel that, using outside advisors has been fantastic, but we also want to start to build some of that tax understanding and that muscle internally. I have a lot of really, really talented managers in my accounting team, but I have nobody with any practical tax experience. And it's just not something you can teach.
Yeah.
So in this very specific instance, I am, being very honest with our organization that this is a skill set that we feel very strongly the right thing to do is to go out to hire. And so those are kind of the practical kind of questions I ask myself when we talk about, do we lean into talent or do we hire externally for the skills that we need in a specific?
That's a really good, straightforward one. I think for the less straightforward ones, there's an inherent fear that at least I have that if the person is really talented, but maybe they're just not there yet, that I'll lose them. So have you ever had that in the back of your head? Like if I may be kind of up against something here because if I don't promote them, there's a risk of them walking.
Absolutely. I think you always worry about losing your best people, right? It doesn't matter age, doesn't matter, it's really I think there's always an inherent fear of losing your most talented folks. What I would say is that I've learned the hard way, I guess, that organizations are extremely resilient. And so do you ever want to lose your best folks? You never want to lose your best folks. And you should always be putting in the right mentoring, the right development opportunities, the right career ladders to be able to retain your best people. But will the organization be okay if you walk out the door, if I walk out the door? Honestly, 99% of the time the answer to that question is yes, right? And so then it comes down to, I guess, how strong of a relationship do you have with your talent, right? I think that if you were to sit down with any one of my direct reports, they will tell you that I'm a very transparent leader. I'm a very empathetic leader. I'm also a leader that very much focuses on succession planning and development. I will always be the first to promote somebody if they are ready and we have a role in the organization that is going to set them up to succeed and develop. I will also be the first person to sit down with them and help them understand why it's not the right time. And ultimately, I think that level of transparency, that level of honesty, and that level of empathy with kind of where they're coming from and what they want out of their career versus, the opportunities and how we treated them in the past usually converge together, and they'll understand if now is not the right time. They usually will understand and trust.
So perhaps looking for some tactical advice for listeners out there, if you do have to have a tough conversation where you are leveling someone, say it's an FP&A manager and now you're going to bring in, a director of FP&A or, VP of FP&A, what tools do you lean on to get through that combo?
Yeah. So typically I'm a big person that very much focuses on benchmarks. So, typically if it's, a situation where I know somebody is very, very, very talented and that they have a ton of potential, they're just not ready now, I'll be honest with them about the fact that, I think you're incredibly talented. I think that you have an incredible level of potential. This is where I see you in the organization. Yeah. And then this is the time frame that I see you kind of getting to that next step in that rung. But here are practically the things that you don't have from an experience standpoint, or this is very specifically what I'm looking for in this specific role or this specific opportunity that you've yet to kind of help me understand that you're ready to take on. And so these are the things that I need to see from you. And if you can exhibit, these qualities over this period of time, then we'll definitely find an opportunity for you within the organization as quickly as we humanly possibly can. But for this specific business need, this specific opportunity, it's just not going to happen right now.
That's helpful because I feel like people are very anxious going into these conversations when they have to deliver that message because they don't know how to structure the conversation. Like they understand the destination of where the conversation has to go, or they understand the point of why they're doing it, but it's hard to know how to structure it to a person where it comes across as empathetic, but also like straightforward.
Yeah. And like what I would also say is I do recognize and I understand that, some organizations are very small, right?
Yes.
And so when you have a smaller team, it's harder if you bring somebody in over, it creates a ceiling and potentially is a little bit more of a difficult conversation. What I would also, I've been in that situation as well. And I have lost people when I've made the decision to go external versus internal. What I would say is that my organization is known as having a very, very high percentage of boomerangs, meaning people who left the organization either because, they wanted to get to the next step somewhere else, or we just didn't have an opportunity for them and they felt very strongly that they were ready. And what I would tell you is we've had a high percentage of folks who then ultimately wanted to come back to Headspace at a different time in their careers. We did have another opportunity open for them. And what I would say is that that's why you should never want to lose anybody who's talented and great on your team.
Yeah.
But you also should not be afraid of it. And you should always keep those relationships. You should always continue to be an advocate, continue to nurture them. And you just never know when that person may be ready to come back on your team.
Yeah. And you also can't hold the org hostage, for lack of a better term, just because you don't want to lose somebody or you're afraid of having that conversation. So that is a very honest assessment.
Absolutely.
I do want to talk about hiring for a second here, because there seems to be a reversion from, say, the prior 10 years where if you just put YouTube, Google, or Facebook on your resume, you would get that job. Now it actually seems like companies, like it almost turns some companies off. And maybe there's a stigma that people coming from those companies can't operate within smaller companies to get stuff done. How do you think about if a person who's big can go small?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that as CFOs, and I think it's just like, as people, we try to put people in boxes, right?
Yeah.
And say like, this type of person is going to be successful if they do X, Y, and Z, or this person won't be successful because they haven't done X, Y, and Z. Unfortunately, people are a lot more nuanced and it's a lot more difficult to do, sadly, right? Which is, I think, good and bad. And so, really what I would say is if you look at my resume prior to coming to Headspace, I worked at very large public companies. The last employer that I had prior to Headspace was a Fortune 15 company, right? And I've been there for almost a decade of my career. And so, one of the things that I remember the CFO at the time, Sean, had said to me was like, the one feedback that we got from the team, and ultimately it didn't matter, but the one thing I just wanted you to know coming in is that there is a little bit of question around your startup DNA.
Yeah.
So your ability to go from a very, very large organization that is very structured to going to something that's a little bit more entrepreneurial and nimble and faster moving. And I just said, oh, just you wait. And so I think it's like what I look for on someone's resume is less about the type of company they're coming from and more about the experiences that they had. One of the biggest tip-offs for me that someone is going to be able to thrive in a more white space, ambiguous, faster paced environment is just kind of how quickly they've moved through roles. So not necessarily moved companies, right? But like how quickly have they actually moved through different roles in their organization? So I love folks who have been part of rotational programs in the past, or if I see somebody who's moved through a multitude of roles in short periods of time and has shown positive progression, that really helps me understand that that's somebody who can get in, make an impact really fast, and be ready to take on more. And so it's really kind of the size and the shape and the arc of their experience and less about the company and the size, if that makes sense.
I really like that, looking for what was the velocity that they kind of tore through roles on their way, regardless of what the company structure was. I do have to say, though, whenever somebody says to me who's worked at a big company, like, yeah, it is a big company, but the department I run, it's like they give me the tools to run my own startup. I immediately go, you clearly haven't worked at a startup before.
You mean Excel?
Yeah. And we've all worked with those people who show up on day one. They're like, okay, where's my stuff? It's like, well, I don't have any stuff for you. You just gotta get it done.
Figure it out.
Yeah. Cool. Maybe one more question around hiring. From your perspective, how does building a diverse team from the outset unlock value?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I was at Chicago for grad school, like one of the things that we learned about is that people tend to feel like the highest level of kind of relationship to people who are both similar to them and in proximity to them. So if you think about, those are the kind of the two biggest indicators of relationship and bonds, is your ability to feel like you have something in common with somebody, as well as the fact that they're actually in your general vicinity or proximity. And so I always thought that was really, really powerful learning for me, because, what I endeavor to have is diversity on so many different vectors on my team, because I want every single person who joins my team to feel like they have people on the team who are similar to them, so they can feel that level of comfort and psychological safety. And so when I talk about diversity, I'm not just talking about race. I'm talking about ethnicity on a broader sense, in terms of religion, in terms of generation, in terms of how they identify from a gender perspective. I'm talking about it on the broadest spectrum as you can imagine, because I want people to come in and feel like they have, people on the team that they identify immediately with. And then it gives them the opportunity to contribute in a positive way to build deeper bonds as we work more closely together. And so I have found that when you actually have an extremely diverse team on multiple vectors of diversity, it tends to bring out a high level of just psychological safety bonds as well as performance.
That's great. I never thought about it that way, that like diversity actually broadens the surface area for connections because people come from different backgrounds. Whereas you would think that if people came from the same background, that would make it easier to connect. But it's like, no, people, what do they say in Shrek? They're like, he's like, donkey, I'm like an onion, I have layers. Basically, like people, the more layers they have, it's like more areas to actually connect with others and have those safety nets.
Yeah, so I'll give you a really powerful example of this one. One of the things I try to do very, very much is I try to have 15 minutes with every single person who joins my team, whether that be like at the entry level analyst all the way up to somebody who's going to be directly reporting to me. Is I always try before they start with the company officially to have that time with them, to give them access to me. And I continue to have, skip levels with every single kind of level of the organization at least once annually. And what I will tell you is most of the conversations that I have with the more junior members of the team tend to be about being a working mother. So, the fact that they are, navigating, becoming a new mom, or they're navigating parenthood, being able to see another woman in their organization and somebody that they, a role that they might aspire to be in the future, going through some of those things and how they navigate that. And I never thought about that as a vector of diversity, but I think being a parent absolutely is also a vector of diversity that you want to be thoughtful about potentially.
Yeah, I think that's huge, because I do feel like that is in the background sometimes, and people just don't want to bring it up or talk about it because they feel like they're going to make the other person feel awkward about it. But it actually makes for a better relationship if you are open about it. I remember my wife recently, she had like this weight on her shoulders that she felt like she couldn't tell her team, like, between these hours, like I have to pick up my kid at daycare, like I can't take calls then. And she finally just said it, and they're like, no, that's totally reasonable actually.
Yeah, 1,000%. And I think, even it's not just women, it's also male caregivers as well, right? That's just a part of the way that you help to think about as that being part of that whole person, and giving them flexibility around the performance and having that be embedded in your culture. It typically allows them to then want to give their best to you, because that flexibility is paramount to, their families.
That's awesome. I'm going to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So
okay.
First question I ask everybody is, you're a successful person, but give us an example of something you've screwed up on the job in your career at any point. It could be this job or a different one.
So, I mean, when I read this question, it's like, I screw up all the time. And so I guess it's like, pick the day, right? But I mean, I think the first Well, first and foremost, what I would say is it's really not about like how often you screw up. It's really just about your ability to own it and learn from it and not repeat the same mistakes. And so that's kind of the way that I would think about it. But the time that I remember the most that came to mind was, there was a fairly important deal model that is at a previous employer, but there was a very large deal that we were, vying to bid. And it was a pretty complex model that I had built to essentially help the organization understand the contribution margin of the deal at the price points that we were going in on. And as literally the sales team was en route to the customer to go pitch our BAFO, or our best and final price, using the model that I had pulled together, I realized I made an error in the model. And it was going to swing the contribution margin pretty materially in a direction that wasn't going to be favorable to us if that was. So I immediately called my boss, who was the CFO of the segment at the time, to let him know that I had made the issue. I, was pretty upset with myself. And I told him, essentially this is the impact. If we can get in front of the customer team, this would be the suggested price that I would go with. And I said, I understand how important this is. If you want to fire me, I get it. Yeah.
Wow, that's big of you.
And what he said was, he basically said, thank you for letting me know. I'll call you back. And then hung up on me. Go call our sales team and kind of help them understand, how we would be he'd like to amend the bid. And then he called me later on that day and he said, I just want you to know that I appreciate the fact that you came to me as quickly as you did. I don't love the fact that you didn't catch this faster. Don't ever do it again. And I'm not firing you. But he's like, learn from this and don't do it again.
Wow.
And so I think that was just a really powerful, I think it has shaped the way that I think about mistakes since. To me, it's not a matter of whether you're going to make a mistake. You're going to make a mistake. We all make mistakes. Every single person makes mistakes. It's your ability to own up to it and to learn from it. And so I have 100% forgiveness for people who make mistakes, but I have very little forgiveness for people who make the same mistakes over and over.
Well said. That was an intense moment. Thanks for giving us that one. Wow.
Happens to all of us.
Yeah, it does. All right, next one here. If you could tell your younger self something, knowing what you know today, what would you tell her?
I would say to be kinder to myself and less critical. I tend to think of myself as my biggest critic. And I've also learned as I've gotten older that it doesn't really serve me very well. And so just to be kinder and less critical.
Positive self-talk. I've been working on that one. It's not going well, but I'm working on it.
Absolutely.
All right, next one. Can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools do you use to get the job done? Absolutely.
So on the FP&A side, we use Adaptive, which I do like Adaptive. It's what I would say is it's not super flexible. If you need to make a lot of changes. So for an earlier startup, I don't know if I would recommend it, but I think if you're a little bit later stage, meaning that your business is in terms of the way that you think about it or look at it or segment it is a little bit more stable, then it's a great software stack. And it actually is a Workday product. So if you use Workday for your HRIS system, it's a really beautiful integration. On the accounting side, we use NetSuite. For AP, we use Airbase. For our CRM, we use Salesforce.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's a powerful software stack. What's the most recent tool you bought?
We actually recently replaced 2 AP solutions with Airbase, which is kind of a newer software suite in the AP space and PO space. And I really, really like it. It's a very, very flexible tool.
We had their CFO Neil on a while back.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. Yeah. I do think it's a great software.
Maybe they should sponsor this podcast. You heard me, Neil. Come on, help a brother out. All right, last one I got for you. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen someone try to expense?
I was actually thinking about this question. To be honest, I haven't really seen a lot of crazy expenses, like stupid stuff, like people spending way too much money on stuff that they shouldn't spend or that wasn't in compliance with our policy technically, but I've heard of some crazier things, right? So what I would just say is that have a T&E policy and make sure that you are sending it out to every single new hire and doing refresher trainings on and keep an eye on it, because there are bad actors out there, and I have heard of some egregious things. And I also do make sure that I follow up with folks when I see things that don't necessarily make sense to me.
Would you hypothetically hear of? What's the scuttlebutt?
I was like, well, what type of, hopefully it's safe for work. But I just people, a lot of it times, just to be honest, it does typically come from the commercial organization.
Yeah, it's always sales.
Yeah, so just really stupidly expensive meals, bottle service, like just things that are not, as they're not appropriate. So yeah. we do put limits and caps on things for a reason.
There we go. Well, Nicolette, this has been amazing hearing about your career. I'm a big fan of Headspace, and I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Well, no, I really appreciate you taking the time. It's my first podcast, so appreciate it.
Wow. Heard it here first. Love it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.